And we're back.
Episode 254 of The Horror Guys.
Yay!
I'm Kevin.
I'm Brian.
And we're going to talk about horror movies.
Of
a sort.
I can't think of any episode that I've been least enthusiastic about.
Yeah. I don't know.
This seemed like a good idea at the time.
I won't go as far as saying we chose poorly, but yeah, it's not our best week of movies.
A couple of years ago, we had Shark Week. Then we had Killer Animal Week with bears and stuff. Then we had all kinds of other
themed weeks. Yeah. Well, this theme week is ants, which seemed like a really good idea. There's all these ants, and there's the classic sci-fi horror Them, which we did a long time ago already.
Years ago.
We couldn't really do that one. So, but there's lots of horrifying ant movies out there, and we thought, oh, what a good idea. Well, yeah, they're all mostly just okay.
Yeah, none of these movies are terrible.
Yeah.
But they're fine. They're okay. If you got an afternoon to kill, they're all right.
One of them, Phase 4, I think, is worthy of highly recommending.
I saw that when it came out, and I really liked it. And I gotta say it's a
still.
Little on the boring side, but I still liked it.
It's slow. It moves slow, but it's engrossing, I thought. This was actually the third time I'd seen it, and yeah, I still enjoyed it.
Okay, yeah. Well, so anyway, we'll
talk about these other ant movies too.
1974's Phase 4, 1977's Empire of the Ants. 70s were a big time for ants.
Scary things. Well, there was all kinds of scary things in the 70s.
1977, the same year, was Lakewood Manor's Ants! ! And the much newer Ants on a Plane. Not to be confused with Snakes on a Plane.
Not that they were cashing in on that at all.
Okay, so those are ones we're going to talk about today. Over on the newsletter at horrorbulletin.com, if you're signed up for that, you could also have read the reviews for Legion of Fire, Killer Ants, a.k.a. Marabunta. The Marabunta ants. More ants. And also the sci-fi, time travel, mind-bendy Triangle from 2009.
Which
no ants in that one.
Does not feature ants. I bet if you really look close, there's probably some ants in there somewhere. But
could be.
Because ants are in almost every movie when you think about it.
And somewhere in the middle of the podcast, we will also talk about a short film that also is not about ants.
Yeah.
We both looked. We looked hard for an ant-related short film.
Couldn't find one. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go back and say something about Triangle. I think that movie is just awesome.
It's really good.
It's not really horror. It's got some horror elements. Definitely more of a sci-fi time loop kind of. If you're into time travel and time loop movies, you need to check that out.
Yeah, we would have covered it on the podcast, except it's really hard to talk about.
It's complicated.
Yeah, there's different versions of the same characters, and it's okay if you read the synopsis and review in the article,
or don't read it first. See it first.
See it first is better. Yeah. Triangle from what year was that? 2009.
Yeah. Highly recommend that one.
But we're not going to talk about it because it's hard to talk about.
Yeah, that's one of the bonus ones.
So on with, no, not yet. Before we get going.
What?
The Horror Guy's Guide to the Horror Films of Boris Karloff.
Boris was cool.
Is finished and will be going online for sale sometime this week. So before you hear this next week, Boris will be available. Boris is going to be out.
All his horror films and a lot of his other important films that he did. Actually, the one he considered his first breakthrough was not a horror movie.
Nope.
Yeah, it was a crime thriller.
Yeah, and of course that's in the book too. So yeah, it's every one of his horror movies, plus 5 or 6 really cool movies that he did that's not technically horror, but were otherwise influential.
And he was the voice of the Grinch.
He was.
In the cartoon. Yeah.
So yeah, he surprisingly number of Asian films. Charlie Chan goes to the opera. Mr. Wong, detective.
In those days when it was
there was another one
okay to be politically incorrect and for a white guy to do yellow face.
Fu Manchu, yes.
Oh yeah, Fu Manchu,
yes.
yeah.
And he didn't look remotely Asian.
No, but that didn't stop white actors from doing that in those days.
Yeah, okay.
Christopher Lee even did it.
Yeah, that was much more recent.
Asian sometimes.
I mean, Christopher Lee did a bunch of those Fu Manchu movies, but I thought Karloff was actually very good in that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's terribly dated and terribly racist and very inappropriate, but he did good.
Yet entertaining, yeah.
All right, so anyway, look for that later this week, or hold off till next week. We'll have a link in the show notes next week to pick that up, and I think it's the best one yet.
Yep.
All right, speaking of the best one yet, of the Ant movies, I think both of us will agree that Phase 4 from 1974 was the best of the bunch we're going to talk about. Directed by Saul Bass, written by Mayo Simon. Mayo.
What a delicious sounding name.
Stars Nigel Davenport, Michael Murphy, Lynn Frederick, and Alan Gifford. Hour and 24 minutes. There's a trailer in the show notes. Spoiler free, this has a lot of ants in action photography. You know, real ants doing is that macro photography that does it?
Yeah. Yeah, teeny small.
A lot of scientific sounding science and weird visuals. A very almost psychedelic-y kind of movie.
Mm-hmm.
The characters are almost the least interesting part of this, but the rest of it makes up for it. It's very strange and atmospheric, heavily in the science fiction realm with horror elements. We both definitely recommend it, and we both like it. Yeah, I think this is the only one I'm going to say this week that you need to see.
Yep, I agree.
I mean, it's maybe a little on the slow side.
Worth it, though.
But I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
So, this 1974 movie, what is that, 40-some years? Go ahead and spoil it for us.
Okay.
If you haven't seen it by now.
Almost 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phase 1. It begins with a narration. That spring, we were all watching space and wondering what the final effect would be. And they're kind of showing space, too. There's some kind of celestial alignment or something that's going on.
We don't really know, but it's some kind of space thing.
They don't say specifically. Astronomers and engineers got excited. Mystics predicted the end of life as we knew it. And when the effect came, it was almost unnoticed, because it affected a small and insignificant form of life.
So that's really the idea of the movie. This space thing happened. We don't know what. They don't really tell us. But somehow or another, it altered ants.
The ants.
Yeah.
We're told that Dr. Hubbs noticed and started investigating, while our narrator, James Lesko, was busy number crunching.
You got the ant guy and the computer guy.
Ordinary ants of different species were meeting, communicating, and apparently making decisions. And as we hear all this, we watch footage of ants in their tunnels. Many, many shots of ants in their tunnels.
Gets a little old pretty quickly, actually.
No, I didn't think so. They're silently communicating with each other. And I thought it was good how they got that point across, that they're cooperating. Well, we cut to Dr. Hubbs writing a letter about biological imbalance in Arizona. He reports that all insects and other predators who prey on ants have suddenly vanished, because they're teaming up. We watch the ants eating a spider. He proposes a biological research station to study and maybe eliminate the problem. The station is built way out in the Arizona desert. It's this bubble-looking futuristic thing, and Hubbs and Lesko are assigned to it. As soon as they arrive, we see the ants are observing them.
This whole thing looks like a moon base
Ant
or
vision.
Mars City or something like that. This geodesic dome out in the desert with these ant pylons all around it. It's very sci-fi looking.
Yeah, it is.
But it's not really. It's on Earth.
Lesko is a cryptolinguist who worked on trying to talk to whales in the past. Well, they find a series of strange towers that have been built by the ants, and they're new, never-before-seen structures. And then they check out a farm, where there's a huge circular bare spot cut in the middle of the field, with a perfect square inside it, and dead animal squares scattered around, each covered with tiny bites.
Are the ants trying to send
It's like
geometrical messages?
Yeah, it's like a crop circle with a square, and the ants did it. Yeah. Pretty cool.
Everybody knows the ants did it. Nobody thinks it's aliens.
Right, yeah. Well, the farmer, Mr. Eldridge, says that they have dug moats and filled them with gasoline to keep the ants out of his crops. He also explains that his neighbors have been pulling out for the last few weeks. The crops are dying, and one farmhouse has even mysteriously collapsed. Hubbs says that the Eldridges need to leave for a few days as they experiment for their own safety. They aren't happy, but they do understand, and they say they'll leave. Phase 2. The facility is near some more mysterious towers. They settle in, and the research begins. Lesko gets all his computers set up, and Hubbs works on other things. They have a lot of 1970s technology, which is kind of cool.
As somebody who is really into those 1970s and 80s computers, it's like tech porn.
And this is like, the cutting edge of the 74 technology.
As far as I know, it's all real equipment back in the day.
I think so. Yeah, it's not futuristic. It's high. It's as high tech as they could be.
It's not. The whole story is kind of sci-fi, but the technology was fairly realistic.
Yeah. Well, 12 days later, not much has happened. Hub's boss is getting impatient. Complains that nothing has happened yet. They put all this money into this base, and you're not producing any results. Well, he says, what are we supposed to do? We can't make the ants perform on command. So he goes out to speed things up. Hubs blasts the towers. He's got this rocket gun, handheld pistol. Blows them up. Shouts, "Let's see some activity!" And there is some activity.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Lesko starts hearing the ants making sounds and communicating. Well, that night, back at the Eldridge place, we see the ants crossing the moats on floating leaves and attacking the horses. They light the gasoline in the moat, and the old farmer ends up shooting his horse. Then the house collapses from the ants tunneling in it. They all get into the truck and drive away, and it's a scene of chaos. The traumatized old woman sees some ants on her husband's head and in the cabin and just starts beating on him, and the truck crashes.
Now, in the previous phase, they were told they had to leave, and they did. They went away for a few days so the guys could do their experiments, but then they came back because they were done. So they were okay being there, supposedly.
Yeah. Well, Lesko explains his process to Hubs as he watches the ant signals decoded by his computer. As he explains, their truck outside, which was acting as a generator, explodes. In response, Hubs shoots yellow ant poison out of the sprinklers outside, which unfortunately drenches the Eldridges also because they were on foot after their truck crashed.
It's some serious bug spray.
Yeah, it's a really thick coating of the whole area. Well, in the morning, the two men go outside in gas masks and suits, like full head-to-toe coverage, and they find the farmer and his wife dead out there. Hubs is not at all broke up about this, and you can really see their distinct personalities and how they're handling this is very different.
Fascinating.
Yeah, Hubs is more interested in how the ants blew up the truck. And, Lesko's like, "There's two dead people here." And like, yeah, whatever. It's science. People die. Well, he says the yellow poison should keep the ants at bay for 3 or 4 days. And they notice the bodies have holes where the ants have burrowed to hide from the poison.
They look at the guy's clenched fist and open it up, and the ants start crawling out of a hole in his hand.
Yeah,
that's a good scene.
Where they took shelter. Yeah, that's creepy. Well, the men find Kendra, the farmer's granddaughter, hiding in a shelter. They take her inside. Hubs doesn't want to call for someone to pick her up, as the authorities aren't going to be happy about the casualties. Lesko wants to call the base, but Hubs warns him that would end their mission. Well, Hubs takes samples of the ants, starts experimenting on them, and Kendra's all traumatized with PTSD and everything. She smashes the bottle, so they lock down the lab, get out, gas it, and Hubs, in the process, gets a venomous bite.
Just one little bite on his hand.
Just one little bite on his hand, yeah. And unfortunately, it looks like it didn't get all the ants either. There's some inside now. And outside, we see ants carrying samples of the yellow poison into the nest. One dies, another takes over, drags it a little further, and a whole chain of ants sacrifices themselves to get the poison to the queen. And she starts breeding yellow eggs that are immune to the poison. And that was, I wondered how how do you train ants to drag a thing like that and then another ant to pick it up? And the ant wranglers must have been.
They were real ants.
And
this was pre-CGI.
Yeah, it was real ants. Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. Like, how do you get ants to do these things?
Well, presumably it was some kind of food or something, but how they got one to stop and play dead or be dead, I don't know. Maybe it was real poison and that's how it works.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, Hubs talks to the base on the radio, and they warn him about a missing family. And Hubs is like, "Oh, missing family? Wow. Well, we don't know anything about that." And he tells Lesko that, everything's taken care of. Well, Lesko continues to decode the ants' movement language, and Hubs hopes to predict their next move. Overnight, we see more than a dozen short towers have sprung up, built by the ants that circle the base. And they have a reflective surface at different angles that reflects sunlight onto the dome, and it begins to heat up. Yeah.
This is weird.
These ants are very smart. Lesko talks to Kendra and shows her around explaining what they do. Hubs shows him the reflective towers and said the heat's going to be a problem. And he also says the ants are now resistant to their poison. Hubs admits that he expected the ants to attack their truck. He left it out there as bait. Lesko figures that Hubs, he figures it out that he didn't call for the helicopter or an evacuation or anything. Well, Lesko decides he's going to call. He picks up the radio and it explodes because the ants have shorted it out. Ew, they're stuck.
Very smart ants.
Yes, they are. And we see the ants crawling around inside the base's air conditioning unit, chewing at the wires. And this is kind of another little nature thing, too, because they have a praying mantis that they have let loose, which, of course, preys on ants. And so there's this little, cat and mouse with the ants and the praying mantis. And again, it's like, how do you wrangle these insects to behave? It probably took a lot of footage to get it right.
Did.
Yeah. But anyway, it's cool. Well, Lesko figures out that a sound the towers outside absorbs. He beams one frequency at high volume, and it causes them to crumble. And in the meantime, the ants went out over the praying mantis, short out the air conditioning system.
Bzz, bzz, bzz.
Yeah. The towers outside collapse, which, it's war. Well, the computers over the course of the day start overheating. So Lesko can't keep beaming the sounds out. They rebuild the towers, of course. And about this time, Hubs starts feeling ill because his ant bite has become infected. We saw lots of ant carnage outside the collapsed towers. Lesko doesn't understand how the ants could know a single machine that everything else depended on. They didn't take down the computers
know to go after the air
or anything.
conditioner?
Yeah, specifically the air conditioner and the radio. No. Well, underground, we see a little ant cemetery with black ants carrying away the dead yellow ants from the towers, like a big funeral. It almost makes you sad.
Laying them out in rows.
Yeah. The temperature in the base cools enough at night to turn the computers back on. Hubs thinks they are being allowed that on purpose. It's also mentioned that he thinks the ants are going to dominate, first taking over towns and then cities. It's the end of the world. Ends of humanity, anyway. Lesko tries to send a message to the ant using what he's learned. It's a geometrical figure. When the sun comes up, starts getting hot inside again. Hubs is delirious with fever and trashes the lab looking for ant spies. And then we're up to phase 3.
Just now?
Yeah.
All that's happened? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what happens?
Well, much of the inside of the base is a wreck, thanks to Hubs. He's irrational, and they're all trapped in there. He's ranting. What happened if I killed the queen ant? He thinks there's one queen ant. Lesko says the war is over, and their only hope is to get a message to the ant, convincing the ants that they're worth keeping alive. They watch a rat outside and see how quickly the ants strip it to bones. Well, they have 2 suits. There's 3 of them, so that's a problem. The ants send Lesko another geographical figure as a message, and he thinks it's an intelligence test of some kind, but he's still working on the meanings. Do they want one of the people inside? Well, Kendra goes outside, barefoot, to surrender herself to the ants, thinking they're angry at her for breaking the sample container. Hubs says he's finally located the queen's location inside a short tower. They're all out of grenades, but he needs to think of something else. He tries to put his boots on. He can't because his hand is so messed up, and it's like his whole arm is all swollen on everything. It's really awful. Lesko says he's figured out the ants' message. They want Hubs, who blew up their towers.
Revenge.
Yeah, well, Hubs goes stomping outside, barefoot with a canister of poison. He's going to destroy the queen.
You could have asked the other guy for help putting his boots on.
Yeah, he just goes out. Well, he falls into a pit, which the ants dug, and they get him. Big time. And then Lesko, in his environmental suit, walks outside. He'd hoped to communicate a truce with the ants, but admits that'll never happen. He slides down into a huge tunnel into the queen's lair, and he watches his fingers rise up out of the sand, it's Kendra, who is not dead. Turns out they wanted them. And then he narrates at the end, we knew then that we were being changed and made part of their world. We didn't know for what purpose, but we knew we would be told. What is Phase 4?
We don't know because that's the end of the movie.
That's the end of the movie.
Things are changing.
Yeah, so basically they're king and queen of the ants at the end, sort of. Or the human emissaries, or the liaisons, or something.
Antambassadors.
Ambassadors. Oh, I like that. Yeah.
The opening shots, as the car drives to the research station, past all the abandoned houses and wreckage, makes this feel like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. But it's not. It's really just Arizona. The apocalypse part is yet to come, probably. These aren't giant ants. They're just smarter than the usual variety, and all the species of ants have teamed up. There are many shots of ants doing various things, and they're all very well done, with real ants, edited in such a way that we can see that they have a purpose. The characters are kind of bland, and the situation, though, that makes up for that. You got the computer guy and the biology lunatic.
And the young girl who's not as young as we're led to believe. The actress wasn't. There's some trivia about that where they made her look a bit younger than she was.
I saw this not too long after it came out as an 8-year-old, and I was impressed with the seemingly realistic scientists and equipment. Today, the technology is really, really dated, but a lot of the story still holds up, assuming you believe something in space could make ants smarter. The photography on the ants is really good. The setting is weird and unearthly. The technology is interesting. It's a weird one, but it's very cool.
Yes, it was.
What's next?
Ants! Exclamation mark. From 1977, which was also known as It Happened at Lakewood Manor.
Which is a much more descriptive thing, except it doesn't mention that there's ants.
Yeah. Ants happened at Lakewood Manor. See, they could have done that.
Ant Attack, Lakewood Manor.
Ant Attack
News
at Lakewood
at 11.
Manor. Yeah. Directed by Robert Shearer, written by Gordon Trueblood. Awesome name. Stars Robert Foxworth, Linda Day George, Gerald Gordon, and Bernie Casey. You'll recognize a lot of faces from the 70s if you're a fan of 70s TV movies, especially TV level stuff. Yeah, a lot of familiar faces. Runtime's an hour and 35 minutes, and you can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, this not just the trailer. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube.
Yeah, and I think this was a made-for-TV, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Spoiler-free, this was kind of small stakes. There's one site and one small group of people at risk, and we kind of get to know them well enough to care a little bit when bad things happen. It's made for TV, so it's pretty tame, but it moves along well enough to be entertaining, or at least interesting. I mean, it was okay. It was kind of middling.
Yeah. And if you're picking this up on DVD or VHS, look for, it's got Suzanne Summers covered in ants, because she was the big star at the time, the breakouts. She's not hardly in the credits. She's like 9th or 10th down the list. She gets like 5 minutes of screen time, but she gets the cover because she was big.
She was the biggest name probably at that time, the most recognizable.
We open on a construction crew and bulldozers working next to a resort. A man in a hole screams for help, and another man runs in to see what's wrong. The first man is being swarmed by ants, but no one can hear him screaming.
Yeah, there's a lot of machines running and noise.
A bulldozer then accidentally buries both men alive, but nobody notices. Credits roll. So this is kind of a crappy operation to begin with.
OSHA would not approve.
Nobody notices.
It's probably pre-OSHA.
I don't know. Gloria and Tony are talking about investments in real estate in the back of their car. He wants a single room at the hotel, but she's strictly business. Inside Lakeview Manor, Ethel Adams, who owns the place, talks about her 32-year-old parrot. Does that parrot ever become important?
No, not really.
Okay.
OSHA was 1971. Okay.
All right, they had OSHA
way
then.
before this.
Outside, Linda flirts with Richard, one of the employees. Construction foreman Mike asks Vince if he's seen Frank, the worker who was buried. We then zoom into the hole the men are buried in, and we see a bunch of ants crawling out of a pipe. Tony arrives and wants to talk to Ethel about buying the place, but she's not interested. She's lived here all her life and doesn't want to move out. Ethel's daughter Valerie tells Tony he can't talk to her now, but Valerie chews out Mike about him and his apes coming inside to use the restrooms, but then the two sneak into the bathroom to kiss. They got a little side thing going on here.
Smoochy, yeah.
The men figure out that Frank and the other man are buried in the hole. Mike goes in with Frank to the hospital, and the doctor says he's been poisoned somehow. Was there something different in that hole? Were there any snakes? Like on a plane?
Something venomous.
Yeah.
Something venomous seems to have got him.
Well, we cut back to the ants amassing ominously in that pipe and also in the kitchen drain inside the hotel. Tony continues to flatter Gloria at the poolside, and we see that Linda and Richard are there too. Mike and Vince return from the hospital, and Peggy from the State Department of Health is there waiting for him. She's there to investigate the death. Mike says that the pit was off limits and the men shouldn't have been in there at all.
There was a sign painted on plywood.
Well, the second guy ran in to help the first one, but the first guy looked like he should have been there. I mean, we don't know why he was in the hole.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so they shouldn't have been there. He looks for snakes in the hole, but there's nothing but worms and ants.
Ants?
Vince gets bitten by the ants, and they soon figure out the problem. Meanwhile, some kid who's dumpster diving falls into a dumpster and is attacked by ants. He then jumps into the pool, where Richard and Mike have to rescue him. Tony uses this opportunity to weasel his way into Ethel and Valerie's meeting, where he says he'll follow the traditions and take good care of the place. But he secretly really wants to tear it down and build a casino.
So it's, ant drama with a backdrop of all this, made-for-TV movie drama from the 70s.
So far, we get more TV drama than we are ants.
Yeah.
Well, Mike gathers the samples of the ants and takes to Frank's doctor, while at the same time, the chef in the kitchen is killed by the ants. Peggy quarantines the hotel and says all the guests need to leave immediately. She thinks it's some kind of virus, but Mike says it's the ants. For some reason, though, there are no ants in the kitchen now. Mr. White, the health services guy, puts ants from Mike's jar in his hand, but nothing happens.
And that was an issue that I had too. The two guys that had been rescued from the hole. The doctor's like, there's not a mark on him. I can't figure out anything.
There would be.
And this guy in the kitchen again. There's no mark on it. The ants were ferociously biting him. And he was, thrashing and rolling around on the floor. There would be all kinds of dead ants on him and on the floor. And
but we saw from the previous movie, they have little
trace.
ant funerals. So they pull away the dead, I suppose.
Well, I guess these are especially smart ants, too. That leave no trace.
Still, Peggy takes the ants to another scientist, and he shows her a video about killer ants that sound a lot like what we've seen already. Angry, Mike goes outside and tears up that dangerous hole with a bulldozer.
Which really makes things worse.
Yeah, it makes it worse. They all head straight for the hotel. It takes entirely too long for him to figure out that he's done exactly the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Tony and Gloria are having sex in their room, and they don't see all the ants surrounding the bed. Ethel calls Tony to tell him they need to evacuate, and he says he's willing to stay and talk business. He leaves for a meeting, and then the ants crawl all over Gloria. Oh no!
No news.
The guests are all ready to leave, but Valerie soon sees that the grounds are swarming with ants, so no one can go outside. Mr. White, he's all like, oh, nonsense. He goes outside and yells at Mike, but the ants quickly kill him in front of everyone.
Yeah, and there's a thing with because he was holding a few ants earlier and they weren't biting him. But when they're en masse is when they attack, and of course he reaches.
Well, they're bigger. Of course they would.
Yeah. That's why they attack him and kill him later.
Mike tells Vince to use the bulldozer to dig a trench around the place and fill it with fuel. Tony runs back to Gloria's room, but she's dead too. All the main characters are soon trapped on the second floor of the resort. The fire chief arrives, and Peggy fills him in on the situation. The firemen set up a ladder truck to evacuate the people, but they're idiots and don't extend the ladder all the way.
And it's so obviously not all the way extended.
Yeah, it's got like 5 feet between the end of the ladder and the window.
They're trying to make it look dramatic, like, oh, we can't quite reach them. Oh, stretch. Oh, we're almost there. Oh, like when we're like, extend the ladder another 2 feet. And it's obvious.
Or back the truck up or whatever.
Yeah,
but
pull the truck closer.
Oh, well.
Drama.
Well, they raise Linda way up in the sky before she's finally able to climb down. That was way too dangerous, so the ladder truck just leaves.
Yeah.
No second attempt. Okay, well then the Coast Guard sends a helicopter to airlift the people out, and scientist Tom talks to the fire chief about poisons and evolution. The copter then lowers a basket for wheelchair-bound Ethel, and that almost goes badly as Richard falls onto the ant-surrounded roof. Vince rescues him using a bulldozer. The helicopter lands, and the wind spits ants all over the spectators, so that has to leave 2.
Yeah, so much for keeping them contained in the, by the trench.
You could land further away, but you could extend your ladder a little bit longer.
Yeah, drama.
Fire chief's an idiot. Okay, so the fire chief reports that they're sending for special suits to get Mike, Valerie, and Tony out, but it's going to take more time than they have. Mike rolls up some wallpaper into breathing tubes, and the 3 people inside sit perfectly still and just try to wait it out. The ants crawl all over them, but as long as they don't move, the ants won't bite them. Well, Tony panics, he flips out and starts smacking at them, and he jumps out the window trying to hit the pool, and misses.
Ouch.
Splat.
Yeah.
Soon the men in suits cover the room with insecticide and bring Mike and Valerie outside. Ethel is going to retire to Florida now. Mike and Valerie are going to get married. Richard and Linda might too, eventually. And the hotel is probably going to be condemned. Will they build a casino there?
Maybe. They could.
Well, it's a made-for-TV movie, and it's full of familiar faces from the 70s. There are some scenes where the actors are actually covered with ants, and others where they're just animated dots. No CGI in this point, but they still did some animation. The characters are all very generic types, so they aren't all that interesting. If you've seen an episode of The Love Boat, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm pretty sure that if you dug a shallow trench and poured a bunch of gasoline into it, it wouldn't make a burning moat. It'd just soak into the sandy soil. Still, we see this trope in lots of movies.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it in the previous movie.
We do. We did, yeah.
But those guys had time to plan and probably send for special flammable oils or something.
Mm-hmm.
You just pour a bunch of gas in the dirt. It's going to just sink, and you're
going
going to have
soak in and
gas.
evaporate, and there's not going to be anything left.
This one is more of a disaster-style movie than a horror film, but it's pretty well done.
Yeah, it's okay.
You don't hear much about this one, but I remember seeing it when it came out. It was all right.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a short film.
Directed and written by Matt Smith. One called Bugbear, all one word.
Bugbear. I was expecting to see like one of those D&D creatures. That didn't happen.
This stars Gabriel Fogarty Graveson and Flora Squires. Runtimes and 8 minutes and 53 seconds. And it's available on YouTube to watch.
Cool. What happens?
Well, Tom is in desperate need of money to pay off a loan shark, and no one is cooperating with him. As he walks through the woods to a friend's house, he finds a strange mask in the woods. And there's a woman walking through the woods, too, but suddenly Tom's not quite himself anymore.
The black and white looks really good, and the camera work is excellent.
Yeah, the direction and cinematography in this was the best part of it.
Yeah.
Well, their acting is okay, too, but the story is...
I'm not sure about the story.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's clearly a no-budget short film, but it looks good and kind of mostly makes sense. Mostly, sort of, kind of.
Mostly, yeah.
We don't know why the mask does what it does, but it does, and that's the story.
Yeah.
We don't know why.
Because reasons.
Because, yeah, okay.
Because mask. If you ever find a mask in the woods, don't put it on.
Yes.
That's the moral of the story.
If you ever find an empire of ants in the woods, run.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take a boat. 1977's Empire of the Ants, directed by Burt Gordon, written by H.G. Wells, supposedly.
Loosely based on his story.
Jack Turley. Have you read his story? I don't know.
I have.
Don't think I have.
I have. They took some real liberties with this. There's some, kind of, follows roughly, but it's quite different.
Stars Joan Collins, Robert Lansing, John David Carson, and Albert Salmi. Hour and 29 minutes. Spoiler free. What happens?
It's a monster movie with ants the size of people. And it's decent, and it's at least unsettling, if not downright scary. But then about 2/3 of the way through, there's a major shift. And we both thought, that brought things down. majorly.
You know, if you're going to have
Just
giant
about silly.
giant ants attacking people.
Almost silly at the end there.
Them did it in 1954, I think, and it was
those
good.
were even bigger ants than
those
this.
were bigger,
Yeah.
much bigger.
Yeah.
These are human-sized ants, and okay,
Approximately.
if you're going to go with that, it's all right. It's an okay movie.
Yeah.
But then they do something about 2/3 of the way through, like you said, that really,
And it made us go, what?
it's a stretch too far.
Really?
We get narration telling us that ants may be the next dominant life forms on our planet. Well, yeah, if they can do what these do.
Yeah.
We're told about ant civilization and intelligence, and the narrator talks about a mind-bending substance that forces obedience called pheromones.
Buzzword.
I guess that was a new thing back then.
Buzzword. Plus, dangerous radioactive waste. You combine pheromones and radioactivity, you got the makings for a movie.
Yes, danger radioactive waste is marked all over the steel drums that the ship is dumping into the ocean. We got an environmental movie here.
Yeah.
Naturally, some of those leaky barrels wash up on the beach in Florida. Charlie, a man in the most 1970s suit ever, carries a box to a boat in the marina. He works for Marilyn, who sells beachfront real estate. Dan Stokely is the boat's pilot, and he takes the group around for a boat tour of the property. He's surly, and she's bitchy. It's a perfect combination.
Well, it's Joan Collins, so, she often is.
We watch as various potential clients get out of their cars and board the boat. It looks like most of the clients are just here for the free boat ride with the promise of being wooed with food and drink. It's one of those come hear the sales pitch and have a good afternoon boat ride, and it'll all be fun.
I'd go for that. Yeah.
Have you ever?
Have I ever? No.
And neither have I.
But I would.
I'd end up with property. That's the way this works. Meanwhile, at the Dreamland Shores housing development project, two workers complain about how remote these new houses are. We see that barrel on the beach there, and there are ants crawling around in the stuff. The passengers talk, scheme, and gossip. It's like a bad episode of The Love Boat.
It is.
Everything in the 70s was attached to The Love Boat
and
somehow.
that's what it made me think of, a little miniature love boat.
Yep.
They're on a boat. Yeah.
Larry is here to pick up girls, and he nearly assaults one of them. It's Captain Kirk's father, Chris Pine's father,
yeah.
Robert Pine.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
He's about the only, he's not the only recognizable face, but he's there.
I recognize just about all the faces from stuff.
We see that something is watching from the bushes and making a high-pitched noise. Margaret talks to Dan about her future plans and wants the inside scoop on his opinion of the shady boss's deals. He's grumpy and doesn't want to talk. Surly, I said so earlier. He eventually says he'd never have anything to do with this land around here, and she volunteers to sew his shirts for him.
Yeah, and the premise is that Joan Collins' character, she's got this chunk of land that's totally undeveloped and would be hard to develop, but she's saying, oh yeah, this will be beautiful, and this will be a little town, and condos and all these beautiful things, and you can buy in early.
Well, they drive in this golf cart. Okay, well, we're getting there.
Yeah.
They all get onto a little bus and go on a tour of the bare lots.
Yeah, it's literally nothing.
Yeah, something with many eyes is watching them from afar. We see them pass signs that say future tennis courts, future pool area, and future golf courts. There's nothing really here but little flags. And, yeah, she's a little on the shady side.
Yeah,
it sounds like there's
bit.
never going to really be anything here.
She's definitely shady about it, yeah.
Thomas Lawson is a skeptic, and he pulls up the fake water pipes that aren't attached to anything. It's just some loose PVC stuck in the dirt.
To make it look like there's some infrastructure in place already. There's not.
The whole project is a fraud. But before he could say anything, he and his wife are surrounded by ants. Giant ants.
Complication.
Mary runs through the woods as her husband is eaten, but she's soon caught and devoured as well. The people on the tour hear the noise that the ants make, but they keep on going, even knowing that they left two people behind.
Yeah, they'll catch up.
It's an island. What are they going to...
Well, it's not...
It's not really
It's more
island,
of a inlet kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of a... Yeah, okay.
A peninsula.
It's Florida.
Yeah, it's a Florida. It's a Florida thing.
Then they find one of the workers we saw earlier, and he's been eaten. They all see it.
Yeah, no hiding that now.
Joe and Corrine decide to walk back to find the Lawsons, but the rest drive on in the bus. The two soon spot some giant ants and run away screaming. Back on the docks, Dan, Marilyn, and everyone else sees ants attacking their boat. Dan hacks at one on the boat with his axe, but his helper is eaten, setting the boat on fire in the process.
Pandemonium.
Dan gets away, but the boat is destroyed.
Yeah,
That could have gone better.
Yeah, they're not going back.
Night falls, and everyone sits around a campfire in shock and denial. Well, they're like stranded in Florida.
Yeah. Well, they are.
The old couple, the Thompsons, admits that they just came for a boat ride. Charlie tries to be friendly with Christine, but she's in shock. Dan and Marilyn argue about who's in charge, and most people follow Dan. Marilyn orders Charlie to stay in the beach house with her, but everyone else leaves. There's an ant inside, so they can't stay there. Soon, everyone is fleeing through the woods, and most of them split up into pairs. Always a good idea.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That may be the oldest trope in horror movies, just splitting up in a bad place.
Mm-hmm.
Let's all split up in the haunted house. It always works out well.
Split up the party, yeah.
Okay, well, Larry's wife falls down, and he's too cowardly to help her up, so she's killed as he runs away.
Proving the trope that you don't have to be the fastest, just don't be the slowest.
Don't have to be the fastest one here, I just got to be faster than you. Marilyn watches as Charlie is killed. The old couple hides in a shed and gets left behind. The 6 survivors eventually make it to a big rowboat, and Dan takes over. They row down a river and hear the ants all around them. They all whine about the situation as Dan rows. This goes on for a very long time, and the ants are everywhere. It's just a matter of time until they attack. The boat soon encounters a blockage in the river, and the ants all attack there. Dan and Joe row furiously, and they all get away. Well, there's a tree hanging overhead, and one of the ants jumps on Larry. Something happens to the boat. I never saw what exactly.
I think they all just panic because there's an ant on the boat and they tip it.
Everyone soon end up in the water for some reason. Now the 5 remaining people have to walk through the jungle. Dan comes to the conclusion that the ants are herding them somewhere like cattle. They all eventually come to a farmhouse, and the old farmer inside has his wife calls the sheriff, who soon arrives. The farmer's wife warns Corinne, "Whatever you do, don't let them take you to the sugar refinery." Up to this point, it's been a giant ant movie.
Yeah, fleeing from the ants.
People get picked off one by one in the woods, and it's fairly standard, monster movie, only with ants. It was all right.
And then things change.
Yeah, now then. The sheriff picks up the 5 people in his car and drives them toward town. We're figuring, oh, good, it's about over.
Yeah, they've been rescued.
No, it's got 45 more minutes.
Yeah.
They drive right past the sugar refinery, and we see that the ants are watching. Mr. Parker is the town mayor and the owner of the motel and the owner of the sugar refinery. He's like the boss. He already knows where they've been, and the sheriff leaves to go look for ants, and the survivors take rooms at the motel. Dan and Joe take a walk, and they hear a familiar sound. No, it's a kid on a big wheel.
Yep.
Sounded like the ants for a minute there. Well, the woman at the car rental place won't let anyone rent one because they've lost all their IDs on the boat. The payphones are all out for some sketchy reason, and Dan sees the sheriff in town, not out looking for ants like he promised. Something is very wrong in this town, and they all know it.
Yeah, so they're sort of safe, but they're sort of trapped. Something's going on here.
At the refinery, we see people being delivered in cages. A whistle sounds, and the ants arrive, going inside to eat all the sugar. The workers at the plant back off, and the ants don't bother them. The sheriff insists that there's nothing to fear, we must obey. She makes us do it. At first, people don't understand. Then the queen ant sprays the new townspeople, one at a time, with pheromones, which lets the ants control them. The sheriff says that the townspeople have to be sprayed once a week.
Can't argue with the science.
Okay. My suspension of disbelief has broken at this point.
Mm-hmm. They're totally mind controlled, just with a little whiff of the pheromones.
Joe and Corinne run into the ants in the cornfield. They're captured and taken to the refinery with the others. They force Marilyn into the booth with the queen, and she gets the ant gas. She then calms down and is on the ants' side of things. Don't you see? We mustn't disobey them, and we must help them. Okay.
Okay.
Well, Dan goes in next, but he pulls out a road flare and injures the queen ant. The ants in the refinery get upset and turn on the human workers. Dan breaks out of the booth, and there's a mass stampede. Joe notices a big gas truck marked flammable and drives right into it. He opens the valves and releases the fuel everywhere. The sheriff's mind control starts to crack, and he shoots the queen, who falls on top of Marilyn. Bad luck for her.
Yeah, that sucks. Oh, well.
Moving on. Joe drives the gas truck into the building and jumps out just before it explodes. Dan, Margaret, Corrine make it onto a boat on the river, and Joe runs up behind them, barely catching up. They then boat off down the river with this seemingly unending jungle ahead of them.
The jungles of Florida. The unending jungles of Florida.
It's not like the wilds of Africa. It's Florida. Call AAA.
They kept giving that impression. We're hundreds of miles from anything. No, you're in Florida.
Well, the first half hour is the usual getting to know the characters stuff, but it's really dramatic and cliched. The acting is fine, but the characters are all types and are less than compelling. Still, the ants are always out there, and you can always hear them, and it leads to a good bit of suspense as the group rows toward an uncertain future. Many of the ant shots are real ants crawling on miniatures. They look pretty good. When the ants attack someone close up, they're puppets, and it's not so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Films like this used to be shown on network TV all the time, and it's fun to revisit them without all the bloody bits being cut out. Yeah, this had more gore than I remember.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there's not much gore here, just people covered in blood as the ants bite them. It was doing really well until the group got to town. The mind-controlled townspeople are silly and stretch the imagination a little too far. You had me at giant ants. The mind slave thing killed the goodwill that the first two-thirds built up.
Exactly.
It's half a good film with an atrocious ending.
Pretty much, yeah.
Ants on a Plane, 2007. Also known as Destination
Infestation. Is that awesome?
That's good.
But I like that so much better than Ants on a Plane.
I don't know. I think Ants on a Plane really tells you what you're in for.
Yeah, it does sum it up.
Directed by George Mendeluk, written by Mary Weinstein, stars Jessalyn Gilsig, Antonio Sabato Jr., Serge Howd, and Karen Holness, hour and 29 minutes. Another one you can watch entirely on YouTube. There's a link in the show notes. I like the ones you can just link to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Spoiler free, being trapped on a plane with killer ants makes for a mighty stressful way to travel. It's a little contrived, or maybe a lot contrived, but it was still pretty good in most ways. There are multiple points that made us say things don't really work like that, but we were entertained more than not.
And again, it was just, a middling. Didn't hate it, but it was pretty good. Yeah.
It sounds stupid from the title.
Yeah.
And I suppose you could argue it either way.
You could, yeah.
What happens?
Well, a tour bus, we start on a bus, not a plane, breaks down with a flat tire in the Colombian jungle. Driver gets out to fix the problem. And we meet Dr. Carolyn Rose and her daughter Jamie, who are on the bus. She's an insectologist.
There's a word for that.
Yeah, entomologist, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But her daughter would rather have gone to Maui.
Wouldn't everyone?
Yeah. So we set up the people drama, because it's kind of a made-for-TV vibe where you got to meet the people and see their drama first. Mr. Aubrey is getting checked out by his doctor elsewhere.
Now, unlike The Love Boat,
yeah,
I would compare this one more to those airplane movies, where you get to meet all the passengers before they get on the plane and the bad things happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, airport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Airport more than airplane.
Yeah,
yes.
The airplane was the spoofs. Yeah. Well, he thinks something in the water has made him sick. The doctor thinks it's more serious, some insect bite that caused anaphylactic shock. He can't stay. He must get on a plane in 2 hours. So he heads out. And then we cut to a bunch of people getting ready for their flight to Atlanta. The pilots go through their usual checklist as the passengers board the plane. We meet some more of them. Mr. Aubrey is a needy, annoying passenger, and it's clear that he's getting worse. He's just feeling awful. Carolyn and Jamie arrive at the last minute because of the bus's flat tire. Ethan Hart is in the seat behind them, listening to the mother and daughter argue about Carolyn being single and desperate.
You know, if you want to pick up women, listen to the ones talking about how single and desperate they are.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Especially when you got them as a captive audience on an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
That's not creepy at all.
But they eventually take off. Well, Mr. Aubrey vomits on another passenger and then staggers down the aisle, and 1,000,000 ants burst out of his skin.
Well, that's different.
Yeah, they've eaten him from the inside out. And suddenly, there's ants on a plane. Well, Carolyn sees the ants and says, that doesn't make any sense. And I saw the ants and said, no, that doesn't make any sense, because ants don't do that. But everyone sees it.
Well, these ants do.
Yes.
Live with it.
Very quickly, the ants are everywhere, including the area down in the hold. Ethan and Carolyn take charge and explain things to the captain. Ants shouldn't be carnivorous. This just isn't normal. Maybe the ants felt so threatened they just hitched a ride on whatever they could. These ants could be extremely dangerous.
Well, they just ate a guy from the inside out. So,
yeah, that's a sign that, yes, these are dangerous ants, yes. Subtle, but yeah, it's there. She then goes back to her seats and tells her daughter that, no, there's no danger.
It's fine.
It's fine. Well, Ethan tells Carolyn and Jamie that he's an air marshal, and he has questions about the ants, which she can answer, because she's an insectologist. The pilot calls Miami with an in-flight emergency. He lets Carolyn tell the ATC how serious the problem of genetically different mutant ants is, and the ATC guy doesn't take anything seriously. Well, meanwhile, the ants are chewing on the wires below, and the lights start acting up. This is a good time for Jamie and Carolyn to talk about the dead father and Carolyn's refusal to date, because drama.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, scientists on the ground are discussing the ants and the likelihood of genetic upgrades to the ant community. Humans have wrecked the ants' environment, so they're migrating. The director on the ground discusses not allowing the plane to land at all anywhere. The ants have no natural predators in America. We can't let them land here. Well, back on the plane, the ants attack some people but are run off with a guy using a fire extinguisher. They talk about depressurizing the plane to kill the ants. And, they could all breathe in their little drop-down masks for a while.
I suspect that wouldn't work.
Yeah, and I think Carolyn kind of clues him in that, no, that wouldn't work. The ants counterattack and mess up the captain very quickly. He's gone into shock. Carolyn thinks the ants are intelligent enough to know exactly who they are attacking. And the ants they're still going at the wiring. They've started a fuel leak on top of the electrical and hydraulic systems that they're chewing on and messing up. We've got to repair that fuel valve, the co-pilot tells Ethan. And to further complicate things, there's a storm coming.
Yay.
Yeah, because there wasn't enough drama and stuff going on. Carolyn tells Ethan that he needs to look for the Queen when he goes down below to fix the fuel problem. Well, meanwhile, the annoying drunk Paulie staggers to the bathroom where he is attacked.
About time. He's been annoying for the past hour.
Yeah. And his friends stuff him back in the restroom to keep him from everyone else. The ground calls and refuses to give them clearance in any U.S. airspace.
So not only do you got ants crawling everywhere, the pilot is in shock next to you, but there's a dead guy hanging out in the bathroom. What if you got to pee? What are you going to do?
There's more than one bathroom.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd want to go in one after that experience, though.
No. Well, Cuba and Haiti also refuse them. Everyone knows about the ants for some reason, every country in the world. And no one wants to deal with that. So the pilots decide to land at an old airbase that's closed, but probably also too small. So, airspace is closed, but, it doesn't matter. They're going to land anyway. Carolyn figures out a way to use the stuff in the cargo hold to make boric acid and insecticide. And she bonds with Ethan in the cargo hold. Romance. And they talk about which of them is hiding their feelings more seriously. Yeah, because that's the place to get romantic.
We're walking through fuel in the cargo hold, looking for killer ants, carrying fire extinguishers, trying to put out a valve, and let's talk romantic instead.
Let's get romantic, yeah. Well, they walk through a puddle of fuel, as you mentioned, looking for the Queen. They find the Queen in the main electrical box and zap it with a fire extinguisher, which doesn't really kill it. Ethan has to splice some wires together for some reason, and, standing in fuel, so any spark would be really, really bad. They pour liquid insecticide all over the electrical panel, but nothing sparks for some reason.
Right,
yeah. And they get the valve problem fixed, so now they can worry about landing. The director on the ground figures out where the plane is headed and calls the Pentagon. They send up a fighter to blow up the plane. Mighty slow fighter. They never arrive. You never see that doesn't go anywhere.
I don't think it does.
No. Well, suddenly the power goes out, and it's all very dark. Ethan rescues the dead drunk guy's pet dog, which was down in the cargo hold. This impresses Carolyn even more. Now she likes him even more.
Ooh, dog hero.
Yeah. He gives the dog to Jamie. And back up in the cockpit, the ants attack this poor pilot again. And the co-pilot prepares to land, even though there are troops on the ground now with anti-aircraft guns.
Which they don't use.
Yeah. And the plane sets down anyway. And suddenly...
Remember how that runway was supposed to be too short?
Yeah.
That was never mentioned again.
No, it's plenty big. Yeah, Well, a TV news crew arrives, and that scares the Army guys away because they don't want to be on film blowing up the civilian plane, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they land okay. The passengers evacuate the plane, but the ants are getting off too. So Carolyn shoots the leaking fuel and ignites the plane, blowing it up, killing the ants. Happy ending. Everyone goes into quarantine, but Jamie invites Ethan to come over for a visit afterwards, and Carolyn doesn't object to that. So, as all the people leave, we see ants on the ground near the runway, including a queen.
No, I didn't hate this movie when we watched it, but after reading that, it's pretty stupid.
It sounds stupider here in this description. Yeah.
The airplane needed more screaming babies. There was a screaming baby in every scene almost. Only having one, though, was completely unrealistic.
It was the same screaming baby.
Yeah. There's only one unbelievable thing about this made-for-TV movie. Actually, there was only one baby.
There were many unbelievable things in it.
Yeah. Yes. I think this was probably a sci-fi original, if I had to guess.
Yep, I would guess that.
But it was fairly intense for a made-for-TV horror film. It's got a lot of the stupid passengers and contrived situations, but it's a decent concept that was not badly done for the most part. It wasn't outstanding, but we were entertained.
Yeah, and again, to recap, Phase 4 is a definite winner, and the others are okay.
I would still say Phase 4 is probably not for everybody.
Okay, all right, I'll admit that. I liked it a lot.
Okay, then over on the newsletter, you can also read about Legion of Fire, Killer Ants from 1998, also known as Marabunta. I think this was on Tubi.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I don't remember which name it went with.
I think it went with Legion of Fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, killer carnivorous ants from South America cause havoc for a town in Alaska because the volcanic activity underground provides them enough tropical heat to thrive. It's another TV movie science that sounds feasible enough to work. It's a decent enough movie overall. Not great, but moderately entertaining the characters that you root for.
Yeah,
pretty much the same as all the others.
Kind of an isolated Alaska town, which is, an interesting idea. The ground heating up.
You don't even think about ants in Alaska. The mosquitoes are the ones up there.
Uh-huh.
And then also 2009's Triangle is over there on the newsletter, which was an excellent time loop script. It's one of those ones where something happens and then somebody goes back in time and something else happens and something goes back in time and something else happens. And
yeah, and it's really skillfully written. You think you kind of have it figured out, and then they add another layer to it.
Yeah, it just keeps going.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, just when you think you have it figured out, they add more to it. It's good right up to the end with a skilled cast and director who does a good job with it.
Mm-hmm. That's actually the winner of the week.
Even though
I
think
we're not
it probably
fully talking
was.
about
Yes,
it.
we both really liked it. It's just a little too complicated to talk about, but you should totally read the review.
Uh-huh.
That one's posted over at horrorbulletin.com. Go over there. You don't have to sign up for the newsletter. You can read all this stuff. Just click through the I don't want to sign up box or whatever it's called.
Right.
Everything is there. Just read it. But if you want to get those emails in your email box once a week, why not? It's free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is it for this week. Tune into next week where we will have 4 more movies and a short, which Probably are going to be more interesting than this week's.
and it won't be necessarily themed with ants.
No, it won't be. It'll be 2023 movies mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. The Ant Week sounded like a good idea, but I'm just very unenthused after watching all these.
Yeah, too much.
None of them were truly atrocious. They're just, it's ants.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay, so sometimes we just watch them so you don't have to. I'm Brian.
And I'm Kevin.
And we'll see you next week.
See ya.